Our next speaker, come on down. Hi, how are you?
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you. Take a seat. This is Dr. Rob Zembroski. He is a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma survivor. And he's going to share his story because, you know, we're kind of dovetailing here. We just spoke to an oncologist. Now we're going to speak to a patient. And the interesting thing, and the thing that we obsess upon at Cancer Schmancer, that Dr. Zembroski is also very engaged in, is causation. What is making us sick in the first place? And how do we eliminate that so we don't get cancer in the second place? So welcome, Dr. Zembroski. Thank you for being here and sharing your story. Can you tell us a little bit about when you were diagnosed? You were quite young at the time. What went down? How were you feeling? What made you think you were sick?
So at 38 years old, my world crashed down on me for multiple reasons. So I had a drug addict stealing it from me in my clinic. My relationship fell apart. I was financially strapped. All this happened all at once. And I think
stress.
Major stress. And I think what happens with people when they're stressed, and maybe you all can relate to this, is we stop taking care of ourselves or we kind of abuse ourselves. And so for me, it was gut-wrenching stress that I'd lose my practice. And so what happened was I was drinking at night to sedate myself to sleep. I was eating crappy food on the run. I mean, it's things that I've never done before. Mm-hmm. So the relationship ended, the drug addict was taken away, I mean, all these things happened. And about 18 months after those stressful events, I started to lose weight. My strength was down. No matter how much caffeine and B vitamins I took, I couldn't get my energy levels up. So I went to a friend who I bought some clothes with, and he's like, "Hey, Rob, you look like you're losing weight." And it just didn't sit well with me. And then as time went on, I started to develop some night sweats, really bad fatigue. So I did some blood work on myself, and nothing was found. So I dug deep into myself. I'm like, something is off here.
You know, my blood test didn't show that I had cancer either. It's not the end-all determinator.
No, and it's not going to just flash up on the screen sometimes. And so for me, I ended up at a friend's who was a radiologist, and he said, "Why don't we take a chest x-ray?" And so we did, and then he said, "I'm just going to do that again." And I know this radiologist for quite some time, and he said, "I'll come back and we'll do it again." So he doesn't say that, and so my gut was a mess as he said that. And as you can see, you know, he said you have a 5-inch tumor in your chest. So at the time, I guess I wasn't fearful. In my mind, I knew I wouldn't die. I just had a gut feeling, I'm going to beat this, no matter what it takes. Chemo, radiation, all that. I was just going to beat this. And as a practitioner helping people with chronic disease, I was like, I need to take the knowledge that I've had in my clinical experience, and now what do I do with this? So I dove into the research like hardcore, like almost obsessive, anal crazy with an elbow light on my desk, just reading and trying to understand, one, how did I develop disease? And then two, what do I do to rebuild myself? So I had the chemotherapy. I had 7 months of chemo. And then I pushed my surgery team up at Yale to cut me open. They said, "We don't do this type of procedure on people like you." And I said, "Well, you're going to do it on me because your procedures aren't going to work as far as giving me a mini stem cell transplant for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma." So this is the picture there. It's 2 days after I got cut open. And as Fran has said over and over, you have to be your own advocate. And so I became my own advocate. And if any of you are suffering from a chronic health issue or serious disease, you must take your health into your own hands. You must grasp this. And so I took it into my own hands. I demanded the surgery, and from 2 days from the time I was diagnosed with that big fat tumor in my chest to the day I got cut open was 2 years. So I had the tumor removed, and as soon as my eyes opened, I said to myself, what do I do to rebuild myself? And those were the words I said to myself. I need to dive deeper to say, what do I do? What do I do? How do I come back stronger and better than I was before? Which then became my passion, became my mission for other people. Because I've been through this. I've been through the war. I know it's a hellish thing to go through as far as your emotional state, but certainly physically when you don't have all the tools. So I dove into the research, and Mercury's in retrograde.
There.
And so 5 years later, this is just to show people that what's possible. And so this wasn't me sitting there saying, I'm just going to go to the gym and work out. I wanted to push my body to a limit to say, what can you do after disease? What can you do after getting the worst stuff, as they call it, Red Death and all the other chemotherapy drugs? And I know I needed to do that. I had to do the drugs because I was suffocating. I had a tumor compressing part of my lung and the vessels into my head. It was just crazy. So I knew I needed to take a radical approach to this, if you will, and it did help save my life. So I dove into the research and I said to myself, what do I do? And there was 5 actions that I took. Not that they were radical, it's just 5 actions that were research-based and very specific.
Get ready. Listen to these 5 things.
Write these down.
Say it slower. Are you going to pop it up on the screen too, the 5
Oh,
things?
I think, I don't know if I saw it there, but
Okay.
I will share it with you. It's actually in my new book as well, called Rebuild. So this is 10 years later. This is actually 11 years later, the picture was taken last August, per se. So again, what's possible for people with chronic illness or disease? If you get your mindset into resolving something, you can resolve it, right? So you have to have a mindset. You have to have this commitment in your mind that you see the finish line, like you did, like Ryan did, like other people did. You have to have that mental finish line. And so I did. And so I dove into the research and I said, what is the collective research, as Dr. Tony was mentioning before, about immunotherapies and nutrition, and what do we do when we move, right? When you lift heavy things up and you put them down. What happens if you don't get 7 to 8 hours of sleep? What's the real clinical research behind all that? And this morning, talking about toxicity, what if you're not mindful about what you eat as a toxin, like gluten, dairy, white sugar, hydrogenated oils, and all the crap that's found in our foods, right, toxicities, and we say, you have to get rid of contamination. So there's a lot of things that I learned that helped rebuild me back to excellence. My hormones were back to normal. My thyroid values came back. My testosterone levels came back to normal. I had my sperm levels checked. They were perfect. It was like, wow. If we just honor ourselves and you actually take these 5 steps, whether it's a chronic health issue or a serious disease, they work. Do you need medical intervention sometimes? Of course. It'd be stupid for us not to think so. But is there a way to combine just natural things in the world that Mother Nature provides us and what we're genetically engineered to do to then take your health to a whole new level? One, you have to ask yourself the question, do you want to do that? Do you want to take yourself to a new level? Do you want to come back better than you were before? In my mind, I did. I had to do this. So I put these 5 research-based tips in a book called Rebuild. And basically what I discovered was chronic health issues, cancer, and disease. And a lot of people don't like to hear this. Fox News, some other places that they invited me to come on and talk about it. One of the people there just says, well, that's a bold statement to make when I say most of the diseases and health issues out there are self-inflicted. Now, are there genetic components to it? Of course. Are there things that sometimes we can't control as an infant developing cancer? Of course. What is it? And I don't think we have enough information to really pinpoint those things yet. We're getting there. But the collective data and the research says there's 5 things that I have put together that really can reverse your health issues. And one of them is eat for your genes. Food is information that modifies a lot of things. Yeah, it's calories and energy, and we build muscle tissue from proteins and nitrogen and those things. But there really is 5 things. One is eat for your genes. And so basically what it means is you have to eliminate things that can damage your DNA and suppress the immune response and cause leaky gut and different problems to happen. Gluten, dairy, sugar, sorry folks, those gotta go. And people always ask me, so, well, doc, what about alcohol? I'm like, well, you can drink it, but maybe, the word moderation, I think we have to use in moderation, because people will take it into an excessive thing. Like my father could say, I had 4 glasses of red Merlot today. I'm like, oh my God, I'd be throwing up with that. So there's a moderation to the word moderation. If you eat nutrient-dense foods all day, you'll modify your genetic blueprint, you'll supercharge your immune response, you'll regulate your hormones. Get rid of grains, dairy, sugar. Don't eat hydrogenated oils. If it has artificial on it, get rid of it. Why would you eat anything that says artificial on it anyway?
And shouldn't it really be organic? I
Everything.
mean, for heaven's sakes. We have a lot of speakers, and some eat meat, some don't eat meat, some are vegan, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, the thing they all have in common is pristine cuisine.
Exactly. And that's a great point. It's you can choose a path of eating, whether it's eating just plants, or now there's this big thing. I was on a podcast or Primal Blueprint. They're like, what do you think about just eating meat and being a carnivore? I'm like, I think it's just radical eating. So if you choose a radical food plan per se, we develop a bad relationship with food. Why would you do that? Food gives us life. So if you eat nutrient-dense foods, you create a great genetic blueprint in the body. You read, like Dr. Tony said, it's the internal terrain that you want to improve. And it's not about cancer. It's just about dysfunctional pathways that lead to a pathology. And it could be cancer, it could be autoimmune problems, it could be leaky gut, it could be cardiovascular disease. So food elimination is also part of that food planning, if you will. And so get rid of things that cause disease, that's gluten, dairy, sugar, and so forth. The second thing is move with intensity. The data shows that those that drive in a car greater than 10 hours a week, whether you commute or sit around, have an increased risk of dying of fatal cardiovascular disease, 48%. So you actually increase your risk of dying of heart failure, whether it's coronary artery disease or some other cardiomyopathy, 48%. So get off your butts and move. And if you sit a lot at your job, or just get up and move, get a desk job, work out. How many people in here work out? Excellent. I mean, movement is life. And the difference is you've heard stuff like, he said we need to work out. We all know this. But are you working out with intensity? I'm not talking about walking. I'm not talking about a jog. I'm talking about intensity. So periods of explosive movement with periods of rest, the data shows it's the magic for us that regulates tons of genetic switches in the body. It regulates the immune response. So you need to move with intensity, lift heavy things up, put them down. If you want to take your health to a different level and you want to build yourself, you can do that as well. The third thing is manage your stressors, and not in a way that you can't get rid of stress, can you? The traffic here was hellish, wasn't it? Oh my God, from the airport yesterday. So you can't get rid of stress, but can you change your perception of stress? And so Fran can take me out in her new car, somebody back ends, hits she smashes the door and freaks out and says, oh, my new car. And I said, Fran, it's a piece of metal, let's go get it fixed. So it's all about perception, isn't it? And if you can...
Totally. When I'm stuck in traffic, I don't have road rage. I say that's the universe wanting me to look around and see where I am.
Exactly. And how many times do you no, seriously, but how many times do you put yourself in check and all of a sudden a police officer is there, or there's an accident that just happened? So there's kind of that universal energy that helps you when you get that mindset there. But also, change your perception of stress. If you can change the perception, you can slam on the brakes or hit the brakes of the stress response. Again, as Dr. Tony was talking about metastatic disease and the other chronic health issues out there, the data shows it's very clear. People that don't survive a metastatic problem have problems with stress hormones, like cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. So if you're under a stressful situation, cortisol is released to not just help the brain develop or have blood sugar, because that's what cortisol is there for, but cortisol will absolutely suppress your immune response. And when it does, that sets you in the stage for disease. What happened to me? I thought my world was over. I was eating crappy food. I suppressed my immune response. B-cell lymphoma is an immune disease. So if you have a stressful situation, change your perception of the stressors so you can manage the response. And the whole idea is to do things that shut off the stress response in the body. Shut down cortisol, shut down norepinephrine, adrenaline. You want to control your hormones. Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, and you have to be mindful that, oh my God, I'm stressing. Now I got to amp up on my antioxidants. I should meditate, take a walk, do something to support your immune system, because you have a mindfulness that you're stressing, and that's not good for you.
No, exactly. But some people, when they stress, what do?
They get mired deeper into it?
Mired deep into it, and then they go to destructive behaviors. Either they drink too much to sedate themselves, they medicate themselves. We want to be soothed when we're stressed, right? So we do these things, and I don't want to say that it's intentional, but we do these things innocently. So the problem is when we do that,
but that's
we medicate ourselves.
cultural too. We have to
No doubt.
forget about that and reset ourselves to think that, you know, get into nature. There's nothing more decompressing than being in the woods, being on the beach. You know, I mean, we're in perfect harmony with the Earth's natural energy field.
No question about it. It's like saying Beetlejuice 3 times and he shows up. Right? There is a universal energy. It's like you bump into somebody or you haven't seen them. You're like, I wonder how Fran's doing. I wonder how Fran's doing. She must be. And all of a sudden, something happens with Fran and she shows up. So there is that universal energy out there. But if you have stress, change your perception. Change the way the stress hormones are activating disease or driving disease in the body. And a fourth thing is 7 to 8 hours of sleep. You know, people say, years ago, I used to think sleep was a waste of time. I'm too busy. The practice is booming. I don't have time to do this. Man, I was wrong. And how do you feel when you lose sleep? Crappy, right? Hungover, you don't feel good, your brain's foggy. What do people do when they don't sleep because they don't feel well? They medicate themselves again. They go to crappy food, high energy foods.
Caffeine.
Totally. To get themselves jacked up, to get past that spot. The research shows that if you lose 2 hours of research a night on a 7 to 8 hour a night sleep night, it causes the immune response to create systemic inflammation. And as Fran said at the beginning of the summit today, inflammation is the root cause of disease, correct? Yes. And so if you do things that cause the immune system to turn against you, it will. Yes, we need immunotherapies, but you become your own biochemist.
Thermostat. That's
totally.
What I always say. You're the thermostat of your body. You know when you're at that optimum 72 degrees. Always keep getting back to that,
Yep, and it's hard for people to get back to it because stressors, time, all these things like all of us as humans have or
but
press
life is short, baby, you know? It's like...
life is short.
Nothing is as important. Without good health, you got nothing.
You know, it's funny, Fran, you say it's a good point. The thing is, when do people chase their health?
When they're sick.
When they're losing it, right? And people actually won't think about their health until they've lost it. Like, I feel fine. My mammogram was fine. My prostate exam was good. My blood work's fine. According to what?
Right.
And then there's another year that passes by where you get a clean medical exam, and all of a sudden something shows up. So really, I mean, we just need to focus on the thing that is treasured the most, that if you lose, sometimes you can't get it back. Like LL Bean, they changed the policy, but if your boots or shirt got torn over time, they gave you a new one. You can't do that with your health. You only have one, and you need to respect it and rebuild it now. And the last thing I think to mention is...
Number 5,
Number
right?
5.
Okay.
is contamination, as Stacy said before. So reduce contamination. That's foodborne contaminations. That's the stuff found in foods, as Stacy was saying before, as for, Roundup. And bread, dairy, sugars, gluten, dairies, hydrogenated oils, methylmercuries in fish. Those have to go. And in my book, and it's all over the place where you can Google like high mercury fish, high mercury, methylmercury can cause DNA damage. These things are called DNA adducts, and how is smoking and these different toxins related to passing genes on that create cancer? It's called DNA adducts. So these chemicals can attach to your DNA and you pass them down. So it's really crazy. So it's reducing contamination, it's getting rid of foods that cause ill health. It's making sure you use organic, however that works, deodorants, makeups, whatever. Be mindful of what you're eating, doing, and putting on your skin. So there really are 5 that will profoundly change your life. I can guarantee you that.
Well, you're incredible, and I'm so glad that you're well, and such a great motivational speaker. It's just fantastic. Sometimes, the best gifts come in the ugliest packages, and you got sick, but you turned it into something that's helping a lot of people. So God bless you, and thank you so much.
Cancer victor. Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thank you so much. That
Thank you.
was great.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Hi, isn't this great? I'm enjoying it and I can't wait to go back and watch more. But I just wanted to take a moment to tell you that you can purchase all of these wonderful speakers as a downloadable purchase that, by the way, is a tax-deductible donation to Cancer Schmancer. You can have all these wonderful speakers at your fingertips whenever you want for reference, or share it with your friends and family. So if you click below, you can make a downloadable purchase, tax deductible for Cancer Schmancer donation, and enjoy it whenever you want. Thank you so much for subscribing, and now let's get back to more wonderful illuminating speakers. Okay, so now I'm just going to introduce our next speaker, who has come here before, and as you probably know, if you've been here before too, I absolutely adore this doctor. He's a brilliant genius. He actually is a few doctors in one, and which is very rare. And he's on this jag now that I really, really want you to pay attention to. It's all, you know, circling the same area, but he is completely obsessed now with how the soil is the key to our survival and could be the demise to our species if we're not careful. So I want you all to give a warm welcome to the very brilliant Dr. Zach Bush. Let's hear what he has to say.
Thank you so much. Love you so much. Hello, human beings. You all are beings of light, and now you've been covered up by a bunch of social expectations and roles and identities that actually aren't that light being. And so to get the full impact of what we're about to do, which is human fellowship, why don't we all stand up, which will drive the cameraman crazy probably, but just stand up for a moment with me. And I want you to ground into the reality that you are a human being full of light, and that you are bigger than any chemical that's been put into the environment. You are bigger than any bad news that I can give you today or anybody else speaking. You are literally a solar event. You are a sun within yourself. And so close your eyes. Picture yourself waking up for a moment on your pillow. At that moment, I believe today is really the full experience of beauty that you have. You haven't moved yet to realize that you're not 5 years old. You're just in that peaceful state, almost feels like you're floating on a cloud. And in those couple seconds, you come back into your body and you realize that you are animated, that you are alive today, and there's breath in your lungs. You haven't looked in a mirror to start to filter your self-identity through the eyes of a society that have twisted that beauty, have made you feel insufficient in that beauty. You're simply a beautiful light being in this moment on your pillow. You are more complex than any other organism that we've ever studied. You are a miraculous result of energy colliding with water, being tuned to a DNA strand that functions as an antenna to identify who you are. 7.5 billion other souls showed up right now with you. 7.5 billion other light beings showed up on planet Earth, this tiny little speck in dark vacuum space of our universe, far-flung suburb in a small galaxy. We're a tiny sun with our solar system. And yet here we are, we all showed up right now at the tipping point of life and biology on our planet. You showed up right now, whether you know it or not yet, in great purpose. You are here on purpose. You show up at an event like this today for many reasons in your mind, but at the soul level, you showed up to be part of a revolution of light. And so I welcome all of you in this room into my light, to be a source to me. Welcome all of you joining through the live streaming. Stand up where you are around this globe and join this light energy that is a fellowship moment. We can bend space, time, everything else that quantum physics has told us. We can certainly bend the behavior of massive corporations. We can bend the history of ourselves. We could change the fabric of life on Earth if we do it through our light. We could change the reality of being who you are today. You are a small, small identity compared to what your potential is. You could explode with such force, with such vehement desire for love and life that you would change every human being you walked by, let alone spoke to, let alone gave a hug to. We have to be in this state of awareness now because there is no time left. There's no time left for transition. There's no time left for sustainability. There's no time left. We are really looking at the next 3 to 5 decades as a moment of transformation. In our 200,000 years as Homo sapiens on Earth today, we have this moment to do something that has never been done in human history before, a true metamorphosis. We have to dissolve into the goo within the cocoon to come out a completely different being, to change all of the behaviors, all of the fundamental doubts and insecurities that drive your behavior as a consumer today has to be transformed. It cannot transition. It has to be fully metamorphosed. And so we are going to go on that journey today to think about how we are going to bring our light together into a glowing situation, a light force that would change governments, that would change massive corporations, that would change the behavior of farmers and physicians, consumers worldwide. You are that light force. You know everything within you that you need to know. There's no wisdom I can add to what you already know within your core. You came into this body with an infinite capacity for connection to the universe and all of its knowledge and all of its know-how. I bow to each of you in your glory right now. And in the moment that we all open our eyes, we're going to be at risk of diminishing our light. And so try to bring yourself back throughout the next few minutes and then throughout the rest of this day, and especially tomorrow morning when you wake up on your pillow, remembering, I have diminished myself again in opening my eyes. I need to look at myself through a different lens than my eyes in the mirror. I'm going to look at myself through the core of who I am and why I showed up today, who I showed up to love, and how I'm going to love them. You guys can sit down if you would like, or you can stay in that state that you're in, whatever you want to do. We have an opportunity to change the world, and we need to do it quickly. And so as we look at where we're at right now, we can quickly see the reality that things have changed quickly in our universe. I'm trying to figure out where to point this thing. There we go. And so this is our current state of affairs. The numbers have changed since speaking to this group last year. Autism has now jumped to 1 in 36 children in the United States. And as you go through that list, you'll realize that there is a crisis at hand that is hard to measure. That list is one of a chronic disease epidemic that really did not exist in the past. It's a new phenomenon. And so as we look at where we are, I could go through that list, but it's most kind of telling that we've reached 35th in the world for health outcomes. And so among all of the developed nations, the top 12 richest nations in the world, we being the wealthiest of those, we're dead last. And so you have to go down not just through the wealthiest nations, but you need to go down through many of the nations that have gone through war-torn situations, have no infrastructure, have no public health paradigms. Countries like Croatia right now have far better health outcomes than Americans do. And we spend more money than has ever been spent in the history of mankind to treat chronic disease, and yet we have missed the boat on this thing called health. And so in this journey, we need to consider where we're headed. The brain itself is starting to collapse. This is ALS and MS and another neurologic disease that I consider celiac disease, which is that gluten phenomenon, a new state. But all of these have gone from 3 to 5-fold increases over the same period of time. And so it's incredible that we've actually engineered a situation for humanity where we can no longer function neurologically. And I think that's the gift we've been given, is the opportunity to function as a central processing unit. These gray matter brains have never had a thought of their own. The gray matter brain has never written a term paper. what happens with a central processing unit in a computer or your brain here is it needs tons of information to flow into it. It then tries to find patterns and it spits out a result that may or may not be true, but it's done some processing. But it didn't have any of it didn't create anything. It just is processing information from outside. And so our ability to function as this processing unit, to see nature and see its patterns and see our role in it, is disappearing. We perhaps never really had that connection. I would argue that in many of our indigenous histories, we were connected. If you look into Australia or North America or South America, all of the indigenous peoples had a sense of their unity with the fiber of nature. But if you look up the definition of nature, as my wife recently did when we were working on a project, it defines nature as plants, minerals, and anything non-human on the planet. Whoa! When did we decide to write ourselves out of the definition of nature? That was our fundamental mistake, and we have done that. And so our children and our technologies, our companies, are being trained into an environment where we see ourselves separate from the nature that we were born into and developed for 200,000 years within. And so as we see life collapse, we need to realize this is not an issue of too much chemical in our environment. This is an issue of a fundamental loss of our self-identity as an integral part of Mother Nature herself. We've been given the gift to witness nature, and yet we have instead twisted that nature to our own ends, mostly to make money. And so we've taken that opportunity away from ourselves and others to integrate into Mother Nature for our solution. I've been lecturing on these numbers, the chronic disease in our children and everything else, for many years. But taking our children from 1 in 5,000 with autism to 1 in 36 over my short lifetime is devastating. It's an incredible number, 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 36. That number's crazy. And then you look at childhood cancers. You look at adult cancers. 1 in 2 adults in the United States will be diagnosed with cancer before they die now. That's an insane number. We have doubled our rates of cancer in adults just in the last 25, 30 years. And so we have a phenomenon of extraordinary numerical crisis, but it didn't really come home to even myself until this past year. In the last few months, I was invited down to MD Anderson, and largest cancer center in the world, and I started to tour it and was overwhelmed when high up in one of these towers, they pointed out the extent of Children's Hospital, which is wow, something's going on here. I'm going to back up to that picture if you can, but I want to make it clear that Texas Children's Hospital is 6 of these massive towers. And as you walk through these halls and see children pushing their chemotherapy poles, you start to get a sense of what have we actually done. We're now building literal cities to house our diseased children with cancer. And so this story that we heard a few minutes ago of a almost 1-year-old developing metastatic cancer, and then you put that into a population of 7 billion and you see the impact, it's an extraordinary thing. The innovations that I saw at MD Anderson were not the chemotherapies. We're using many of the same chemos we've used for the last 40 years. The innovations were ways in which to make it funner to have cancer. The innovations were wagons that you could be pushing the kid in or pulling the kid in that had the chemotherapy pool built into the wagon. These are the innovations I saw at MD Anderson, is ways in which to normalize, to palliate the reality of a childhood generation that has cancer. What are we doing? What state have we diminished ourselves into? Homo sapiens, human beings, beings of light. What have we done? How have we diminished ourselves to this level that we would allow this to happen, that we wouldn't even recognize this happening? What bubble are we living in that we would be unawares of this? What bubble are you living in that would keep you so separated from your nature that you would develop cancer at a rate of 1 in 2? Major depression now is at that same ratio of 1 in 2. We are losing hope as a species. We are at a crisis point. That crisis point is certainly marked by childhood disease, but this is even more fundamental to our extinction, which is our capacity to birth those children in the first place. This is the line that denotes the progress of sperm counts in all Western nations just over the last 45 years. A 52% decline in our country, 58% declines have been noted in other Western nations. 52 to 58% decline in sperm counts over a single lifespan. My short life, we've seen that kind of collapse. To reach this decline at this point of 52.8% decrease, we have 1 in 3 males with infertility from low sperm counts. 1 in 3 human beings in the civilized world can no longer reproduce. Do you see that line flattening at all? Does it look like we've reached the bottom of that line? It is a straight into the ditch line still. There is no flattening. As we extend that line just 2 more decades, we can quickly get to the point where we could have 50 to 60% of males with infertility. It turns out that women are tracking these same rates. If we look at just one condition, polycystic ovarian syndrome in women, which is the leading cause of infertility now in women, it's 1 in 4 young girls. And so what have we done? How far have we unplugged from our potential to be alive, to let this happen? And if this was some irreversible process, I would not be spending my life traveling around lecturing on this stuff. I would simply go find the cleanest little nook in Patagonia and set up shop there with my family and ride out the extinction event of human history. If you follow these numbers out, our fertility and our chronic disease patterns, we've got about 60 to 70 years left. Imagine my shock when starting to work with farmers a year ago, come to find out that they're telling us that there are only 60 harvests left on the planet. With the rate of devastation of the soils, we had the same expiration date as human biology itself. When I heard that, I realized I was getting close to the epicenter of the problem. If soil and its death and humans and their death and their extinction are happening at the same point in time, we're reaching this opportunity to find a root cause event. We're reaching this opportunity to get to the point where we start to understand what's happening. You guys heard about glyphosate earlier. Glyphosate, that most ubiquitous chemical on the planet right now, is interesting because it's getting at something fundamental to consciousness itself. Consciousness begins, I believe, at the moment of self-identity. And I think we diminish ourselves in our self-identity by what we allow society to tell us what our identity is and where we need to improve ourselves and the like. But this is a picture from our laboratory of what happens with glyphosate when you take a healthy gut lining, which is our largest exposure to the outside world, and give it glyphosate. It falls apart in a matter of minutes. And as that gut lining falls apart, that is backed by 60 to 70% of your immune system by volume. It produces about 80% of your total immune system antibodies. And at that moment, you have lost your self-identity at the molecular level. Is it any wonder then that we're going to have autism, cancer, major depression, anxiety disorders, sleep disorders, sexual dysfunction, drop in sperm counts, or anything else when you lose your self-identity at the core level? Is there any way health could progress? And so we've added a chemical that's destroying our capacity for life at that fundamental state of identity. Cancer mortality by state before and after 1996, when we debuted the phenomena of genetically modified organisms that would be Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready soybean, alfalfa. You go through the long list now, there's over 35 Roundup Ready genetically modified crops that we produce. All of the cancer death was dominant in the east, northeast specifically. The one exception was prostate cancer, which was always in the northwest, but never the south. But look at between 1996 and 2007. In a short decade, we reversed the cancer map. Keep in mind that every cancer across the whole United States went up during this time. But there was a nuclear event. There was some explosive damage that happened in the South to bring it to the #1 cause of or environment for cancer death in the country, yes, but even more so in the entire developed world and world at large. The antibiotics we prescribe are now recognized to drive cancer death. This is the curve for antibiotic exposure in the United States, which is totally flat, which means we've been prescribing the same number of antibiotics every year for the last couple decades. And that's 7.7 million pounds of antibiotics, which is disgusting. That equals out to 833 prescriptions for every 1,000 man, woman, and child. 833 for every 1,000. Gross. But that antibiotic behavior hadn't changed, so it didn't convince me that that was the cause for this shift. We had to find some other damage to this microbiome, this fundamental foundation for life, and that would become the glyphosate molecule in our research. And so the glyphosate molecule has been patented as an antibiotic, antifungal, antiparasite. We're now using about 4.5 billion pounds of this chemical in the soils of the earth. It's a water-soluble compound. Toxins should never be water-soluble. That's a bad idea on a planet that's 70% water, that grows plants that are 70% water, that feed humans and other animals that are 70% water. We are a water-based biology, and when you add a water-based toxin, it gets everywhere. You can't wash glyphosate and Roundup off your food. It's integrated into the water structure of that kale or that apple. It's actually in it. And, of course, as we do clinical trials with this, we can't find a human right now in the United States that's not peeing out some glyphosate. And so we are literally steeped in this chemical. 75% of the rainfall, 75% of the air we breathe contaminated with Roundup. Spraying map between 1992 and 2011, not surprisingly, massive increase. But it didn't match up perfectly to our cancer pattern until we found another map, which was this one. And this map is that of the tributaries of the Mississippi River. And so this huge swath of purple in the middle of that, I don't know, every time I touch that laser pointer, it advances. And so that's exciting. I think somebody else might be helping me out here. So let me see here. Can we get back to that map? If not, the Mississippi River, it turns out, in its tributaries would collect some 85% of the Roundup that we've sprayed and bring that into one water system. And in one water system, collecting all of that Roundup into one place, the last 90 miles of which runs from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, Louisiana, is now called Cancer Alley. That 90 miles has the highest rates of cancer in the entire world. And so we did something phenomenal. We destroyed life on Earth at the fundamentals of the fabric of life, which is this relationship between soil, the diverse microbiome of bacteria, fungi, and beyond, with human life itself. The antibiotic usage has increased the impact of major depression. One course of antibiotics increases major depression by 23%. 2 courses of antibiotics in a year increases your risk of major depression by 56%. Anxiety disorder, 1 course of antibiotics, 17%. 2 courses of antibiotics in a year, 44% increase in anxiety disorder. Now what happens if we put it in the water and we put it in the food and we start eating and drinking antibiotics? Is it any wonder that our children are having chronic fatigue, crushing panic attack in middle school? They haven't even had the opportunity to find their adult identity and their purpose here, and they're being crushed by this vapor experience where I don't have the neurochemistry to even produce hope, and I'm a child. What happens when we produce children without hope? And then in that hopelessness where they are crippled by this ADHD and anxiety and depression, we then give them drugs that put them into a fight-or-flight state, Adderall, Ritalin, and these stimulant drugs to put them into a fight-or-flight state. What happens then is the creative section of the brain shuts down. When you're in a fight-or-flight state, you can't have a creative thought. So what happens when we take away hope and then drug up a whole generation of children such that they will never have a creative opportunity to pour out the metamorphic change that they would need to do to bring forth a future healthy generation? Glyphosate usage worldwide, I already touched on that. We'll go ahead and jump by that. 4.5 billion pounds. This is from space now, looking down at that Mississippi River. This is looking at oxygenation. You see that red and yellow and light blue zone at the end in the Gulf of Mexico. That's now called the dead zone. The dead zone in our ocean at the end of the river is now the size of the state of Rhode Island. The threatened area is larger than the state of Texas. Let me show you what that looks like in real life. On the right, you see living ocean. On the left is dead zone. That's the Gulf of Mexico. We've put millions and millions of dollars worth of fisheries out of business as we killed the ocean. Which presidential candidate have you heard speaking about this? This is interesting. Nature's adapting to our behavior. This fish can breathe on land. It's so adapted to be able to breathe in low oxygen damaged water systems that it's developed a very specific capacity for breathing in these low oxygen states, such that it can actually cross small areas of land to get to other ponds. They're now poisoning any pond they find this fish in because they feel like this thing is going to take over our major freshwater systems now. And so nature is adapting to our toxicity. This is what the world used to look like, covered in massive grasslands through Africa, through the United States, through North America, South America. This is what we've done to that. We've torn up all of that grassland and turned it into strips of genetically modified crops. You can see how much exposed dead soil is between there. And then we take that, and in the wintertime, we used to have these vibrant spaces during the rest of the soil that would bring nutrients back in. And now it looks like this. In the wintertime, our farmers are supposed to plow everything up. Next slide there. This is what it looks like now to raise animals. You can't find a blade of grass that these animals have ever gotten to interact with. These animals are literally in a dust storm. Take another hit here. This is the depleted soils on the planet. The reds are severely depleted. The yellows are degraded soils. The only stable soils now are high mountain ranges and the tundra of Canada and beyond. We have killed the soils of the earth. We're now in the largest dust storm in history. We are in a bigger dust bowl than we did in the 1920s and 30s. We're losing 2 tons of topsoil a year. Did you see this storm just late in 2018? This storm cloud, next slide, this is that same storm cloud moving into Phoenix, covering that city. That storm cloud, that dust cloud reached more than a mile high in the atmosphere as it covered the planet. 2 tons of topsoil off of every acre in the United States now. There is a path out of this. If there wasn't a path, then I would not be here. You wouldn't be here because you're on purpose and you're here to find out how to change everything. The path out of here is to embrace the fact that we are less human than we are microbial. We are an organic garden. You need to start to treat your body as if you were that organic soil that would breathe the abundance of life itself. We are going to pass this one up and just jump into the solutions here. We got to get the food back to grow the medicine. The medicine needs to be back in the food again. To do this, we need the microbiome to be back. We block the ability of our food to make the medicine as we go into this. Mother Earth is an extremely gracious being. She is here to play with us, to work with us, to co-create with us. As we start to treat our bodies and our farms as organic oases, as the foundations and fundamentals of life itself, she responds beautifully and quickly and brings us back into alignment. We've shown under the microscope now, as you bring back the intelligence of soil into this scenario of Roundup, you become bulletproof. We become bulletproof to Roundup when we welcome the soil microbial intelligence back into the human gut. 60 million years ago, Mother Earth planted this stuff in our soils. We now extract that and we put that in the human experience and we find the antidote to Roundup with which we're killing her soils today. And so as the gut falls apart, self-identity erodes, we put the microbial intelligence back in and the whole thing knits itself back together. Self-identity restored, not from a human intervention, but through a soil intervention. The fabric of this planet is here to heal us, and we need to align ourselves with it. And so we welcome your opportunity to join us. We are working with farmers across the country with farmersfootprint.us. It's an org that we're now training farmers and communities to live without the chemical dependence on Roundup. We have a toolkit to help your school systems get it out of your parks and playgrounds. We have a toolkit for you to get your city councils to ban Roundup on your streetscapes and everything else that are contaminating you. So join us at Farmers Footprint. We are going to change. We are going to metamorph. We are going to become the light energy that we have to be to make this thing work. Thank you for your time. I appreciate all of you. We'll see you next year.